Technology permeates our daily lives. It is always important to think about what technology should do instead of what it can do. I'm Richard Koh, and welcome to our Tech 101 with our technology strategist. Hi, Louis.
Hi.
Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here.
Great. How are you? All good?
Yeah, I'm good.
That's great to hear. So first thing I really want to ask you is that, as a developer, you've been one before. When you think about assembling code and writing code, things like that, what are you doing to save time, for example?
Yeah, so there's always this saying, right, especially in the software development space, right? If you have to do something more than twice, always automate it. Right, so that's something I've been doing a lot more previously in my previous capacity as a software engineer. So we have to consider a lot of things like how do we ensure our codes are tested well, how do we save time in the earlier part of the development cycle rather than later. So there's a lot of these things as software engineers we consider to ensure that we are always shipping code at the highest quality.
That's great. I like that saying, if there's something that you're doing twice, always find ways to automate it.
Yes.
And I think that's the kind of flexibility, efficiency that a lot of organizations are looking for, because they're trying to find efficiency to be able to ship products and services out as quickly as possible,
Yes.
but also with the right kind of quality. So maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the experiences of tools that you've used at Microsoft in doing some of this kind of work.
Yeah, so over here in Microsoft, we use a lot of GitHub. Microsoft owns GitHub, and GitHub is the largest open source community out there. And we use a lot of GitHub to help us with source control, with security. And the point you mentioned about the organizations, right? We talk about this concept of DevOps. DevOps has been around for quite a while now, and we do see organizations embracing DevOps. They use collaboration platforms, they use automation, as we talked about, and we do see that they are able to ship their code faster. But I think there's another area when we look out at a wider level of devsecops, and when we bring security into the picture, we still see that old traditional security practices, it's still encumbering, right, the whole software development process, right? So while they are agile in terms of writing code and doing some amount of automation, right, it's the security part that entangles that whole process. So that's why we want to look at DevSecOps holistically and see how we are able to shift left, right? How do we bring security right at the start of the whole cycle, rather than an afterthought, rather than a point in time, just right before production.
That's great. That's a great point. I think security is really topical of mind in a lot of our customers today. And the way they think about how do they build security right at the upfront itself. So maybe just touch on a little bit when let's double click on that security aspect of it. So in practice, what would you do exactly when you are looking at the code itself and then interacting and leveraging GitHub in that process itself? How do you bring that element into our development process?
Yeah, so typically when we write code, testing is usually an afterthought. We write the code and then we do our testing later on. We deploy the code, and then in maybe a UAT environment, we do further testing, end-to-end testing in that environment. So these are practices that testing is done, but it's just done later, right? And we have seen, right, bugs as they are caught later in the development cycle, right, closer to production. They cost a lot more to fix, as compared to it being found early on in the cycle. So with GitHub, you are able to create a pipeline and have some of these security practices, security automation in place very early on in the cycle. And I think that's what we do here in Microsoft, and that's what I think we are starting to see organizations are picking up.
Okay, that's a great point. And it also alludes to a point that from the development team perspective, you need to have more diverse set of engineers being involved upfront, especially maybe the security guys, for example. Yeah. And have you been seeing that trend emerging, let's say, among our customers and partners?
To a certain degree, yes. So there is an evolution of the software engineering role rather than throwing over the testing process, what we call over the wall. They are picking up skill sets, new skill sets, right, to code defensively, right, with security practices in mind. In Visual Studio, we have security plugins that will remind the developer, right, that will highlight to the developer if they are not using certain security practices at development time, right? So as a developer, I do not need to wait for my security test to kick in. As I'm developing, I'm already reminded, I'm already prompted, right, that I should code in a different way. So for example, a very simple example is to use HTTPS instead of HTTP. Right? This is an example that can be picked up within the development environment.
Okay, that's great. You did mention that the development engineers got to pick up like new skills and new understanding of coding defensively in terms of security itself. So just making it tangible for our audience, where can they go to learn more about these kind of practices?
So they can go to check out our Microsoft Secure Development Lifecycle Framework. There are a lot of practices in there that will highlight within a security framework of what they should do and how they should align, right, to certain industry security practices. They can download the Visual Studio security plugins, and as they code, there is a list of rules that will guide them as they are doing the development. Okay,
that's fantastic to know. And to the audience, we're gonna flash the URL over at the bottom of the screen over here so that you can check out the information as well. So Louis, yes. GitHub is very big on open source. So tell me a little bit about this, because I know that enterprises out there are very big on embracing open source as well. So double click on that for us a little bit.
Yes, so enterprises are embracing open source software in a big way. Rarely do you see organizations starting a project without using open source. Majority of software projects today do rely on open source software in terms of libraries, packages, one way or another. And I guess the thing about enterprises, and we are talking about DevSecOps, is that how do they get visibility in that whole software supply chain? Right? They might be using open source library, which has dependencies on multiple levels of other open source libraries. So along that whole chain, whole supply chain, right, a single vulnerability in one of that library, right, could impact the security posture of their eventual software. So in this case, we have GitHub Advanced Security, and what that does is it scans all the libraries, open source libraries that you're using, against known attack vectors, known vulnerabilities, and it tells you if a particular library that you're using is out of date, if that particular version has a known attack or a known vulnerability against it, and it gives you that visibility firstly, and secondly, it helps you to resolve it through a pull request merge.
So that really speaks to the security aspects that you were talking about earlier, as well as saving time.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at the demo right now.
Sure, let's do that.
Alright, so we're here within my GitHub repository, and this is where my source code sits. I'm going to be walking you through some of the features of GitHub Advanced Security, starting with CodeQL. CodeQL scans my entire code base, and it tells me all the different security vulnerabilities that it has detected. In this instance, it has highlighted that this line over here is susceptible to a code injection, and it also tells me and highlights the different CWEs that are related. This allows me as a developer to resolve issues earlier in the development cycle before it goes further down the deployment pipeline. The other feature is Dependabot. So we talked about the wide usage of open source library in software projects today. And in this case, I'm using Bootstrap, a popular open source library in my code. And Dependabot has detected that I'm using an older version of this library that has a possible cross-site scripting vulnerability against it. So what Dependabot has also gone ahead to do is it has created another branch, it has updated the version to a later version of this library, and it has gone ahead and created a pull request for me to review. So what I can now do is review the changes, and merge this pull request and continue with my workflow. So this allows me as a developer to detect issues like this very early on in the development lifecycle, and it allows me to stay productive and continue to focus on the task at hand.
Hey, Louis, that was a very good demo. It was efficient, it's secure, and you are going to impress your CIOs and CISOs when you show them how well you have done all this code together.
Yeah, and you can even tell them you did it manually yourself and claim the credit for it. Okay, but jokes aside, you can visit this link below on GitHub Advanced Security and see how you can implement them in your projects today.
So thanks for joining us today. This is a very insightful session with Louis Leong today, and I hope you stay tuned to our series. So I'll see you at the next episode.